You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Gabe Myers, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, good, Gabe Molina. How are you?
I'm doing well. This is basically Gabe squared.
Hey, two Gabes is better than one.
That's right? What I'm talking about. Hey, so Russia invaded Ukraine this week, and immediately I thought, I need to talk to one of my favorite people about this. And, right away, you kind of pick up on the news and when you're watching things on the internet or on TV or whatever, you're kind of slowly grasping what's going on. But I know you have more knowledge in that area than what I would. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me on, Gabe.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, this is something that I love to talk about. It's near and dear to my heart. So I just recently, I live in the Washington, D.C. area now, and I work for the Department of Defense, specifically the U.S. Space Force now. But the last 4.5 years, I was the Director of Communication and Public Affairs for U.S. Air Forces in Europe. That's their headquarters is in Ramstein Air Base, Germany. So for the last 4 years, really one of the main objectives of military forces over there is to protect allies and partners and do collective deterrence really against any adversary that could possibly threaten the NATO alliance. So really that's what I've been doing for the last 4.5 years, and now I'm back in DC, missing Europe a little bit because Europe's awesome. And,
that's what I hear.
I made a lot of friends over there, and there's some really good people over there doing some great work. So really, that's my area that really I've been doing the last 4.5 years, and it's been a lot of fun. And a lot of it has been focused on some of the activities that that we're seeing unfolding today between Russia and Ukraine. Yeah,
let me start out by asking you, NATO. What is NATO exactly? I get that it's kind of like a coalition of different countries, right?
Yeah, so it's made up of, I believe there's 30 countries now. So it's an acronym for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So really it's not all of the European countries, but just about all of the European countries and Canada and the United States. And NATO was originally formed as a military alliance to counter the former Soviet Union. And even though the Soviet Union collapsed in, I believe it was 1991. NATO has not only thrived and continued to grow, but they continue to accession new countries that are interested in a military security alliance in the European theater.
What does it take for a country to be a part of that?
So I don't know all of the details of exactly how. Okay, so if I'm a country, and lately I think the last country that was accessioned into NATO was Macedonia, or maybe specifically, I think they're actually called North Macedonia, and so it's different than the EU, Gabe. So the EU has certain financial standards that they have to meet, certain climate standards, different things to become like an EU country. Well, NATO is a military alliance specifically. So there's certain standards that each country has to meet to be accessioned into the NATO alliance. And so this has been one of the sticking points where you see unfolding right now between Russia and Ukraine, because Russia has asked for security guarantees that Ukraine would not join the NATO alliance.
And they've been asking that from who, Ukraine?
Yeah, so not just Ukraine, but they've asked the United States to guarantee that Ukraine would not be admitted. So, obviously the United States is the big bear on the block as far as, allowing certain countries. They've got the biggest voice as far as, okay, does certain countries meet certain criteria? And if the United States was against a certain country being accessioned into NATO, then it would it would definitely be the loudest voice and weigh a lot more than some of the other countries. Because obviously the alliance is made up of 30 countries, and the goal has always been the 2% of your GDP towards military equipment and military operations and things of that nature to join the NATO alliance.
I got you. And so I'm assuming that that's something that Russia frowns upon, just to not have, I guess, a country affiliated with NATO so close to them?
No, 100%. Yeah. So they've ultimately, one of their goals has been to almost set up like a buffer zone.
Okay.
They do not want to have NATO countries on their border. And so Ukraine, in their mind, has been one of the last border countries. And so for them, they look at it as like a red line. If Ukraine was to become a NATO country, that for them is a no-go zone. And that's what we see that unfolded in 2014, with the annexation of Crimea and Russia going into the Donbas area, which is in eastern Ukraine. That was the initial kind of salvo to send the message to the West that, no, we're not going to do this, and it's not going to be acceptable for us to have NATO join the NATO alliance. Or I'm sorry, Ukraine join the NATO alliance.
So what is the, to me, because I'm kind of an idiot, but to me, that's all Russia, right? Which is incorrect. But what is the relation, I guess, between Russia and Ukraine and some of the other countries over there? Because isn't there a large group of I don't know if they're Russian or if they're just pro-Russians that live in Ukraine?
So that's a great question, Gabe, because that's how Mr. Putin sees it, right? I think he's been on the record as saying that Ukraine's not a real country, that it's historically Russian lands that are there in Ukraine. But to be honest, from what I understand about Ukraine, not Russia, but Ukraine, is that the Ukrainian people are, I guess, for lack of a better term, an ancient civilization. And that land there has been contested and fought over, where modern Ukraine sits, for probably about 1,000 years now.
Really?
So, and because they were part of the Soviet Union, Russia, and Vladimir Putin has said this, and he's said this multiple times over the course of his tenure, of his 20 years that he's been in power in Russia, is he has said that the single most geopolitical disaster of his lifetime was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he has been laser focused on building Russia back up. He believes that has been embarrassed and stepped on and ridiculed and not taken seriously since 1991. And it's been his personal goal to move Russia forward and bring the glory back to once was the Soviet Union. Now, I don't know if that means, getting the band completely back together, but at the end of the day, he definitely has interests in keeping certain countries that were a part of the former Soviet Union within his sphere of influence.
Got you. So I'm kind of, as you're talking about this, I'm kind of digesting it. So in 1991, the Gorbachev knocked down that wall thing happens, right?
Yep.
And so that's the Soviet Union. That's when it becomes Russia. Who else was a part of the Soviet Union?
Well, the wall actually fell in 1989, and I could be wrong, but the collapse of the Soviet Union happened shortly a few years after. That was kind of the first breakup of it, with the wall coming down in between East and West Germany, and then in 1991. So you've got, and I know I'm going to be wrong as far as all the countries that were a part of the Soviet Union that became independent nations, but we're talking about Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. I think Afghanistan was a part of the Soviet Union.
Oh, really?
Georgia, the country of Georgia, Armenia. There's a lot of countries that became independent nations. It wasn't exactly right away, but Ukraine was the largest landmass to gain their own independence around the 1991 timeframe. And Ukraine also had nuclear weapons at that time as well. And so one of the agreements to Ukraine becoming an independent nation is that they would give up their nuclear weapons to Russia to be destroyed. And so that's one of the things that I've seen recently in the news is that Ukraine, had they known that today would come and they would be in this situation with Russia, they would have never given up their nuclear weapons.
So that was one of the stipulations in them becoming independent.
It was.
I got you. Very interesting. And I guess that's why several years ago, I guess Russia was trying to go back into Georgia, right?
Yes. So that's one of the things. So Russia has a whole bunch of these little what they're called is frozen conflicts. So there's an area in Moldova called Transnistria. That is, Russian troops are in that area. It's an autonomous area that really is supposed to be part of Moldova, but is not. It's just this stateless area that Russia has a footprint in. And then there is a couple of areas in Georgia so I believe that was 2008 when Russia went into Georgia, smacked them around a little bit, and then what they were doing is making sure Georgia could not insert their will and dominance over two areas in Georgia. One of them is called South Ossetia, and I can't remember the name of the other area, but there's two other areas, like I said, that is like Transnistria, where they're kind of stateless. They were originally part of another country, and now they've got Russian troops on there, but they don't really have any kind of power or autonomy or anything. Really, they're just these little parcels of land where Russia decided that, hey, let's create some chaos here, right? Mm-hmm. And it'll weaken the government of the country that they're supposed to be of. And then that way they can't go to the West and they can actually still remain within our sphere of influence.
And Does that make sense? Yeah, and I guess potentially start being dependent on Russia again, I guess, to a certain degree.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the biggest goals of Russia, especially where there's a lot of Russian speakers. So Russia tends to foment these flames of dissent in places where there's traditionally Russian speakers, and maybe they feel. And you got to understand, you got to put yourself in the perspective of the Russians. They look at NATO as an existential threat, and losing power after the Soviet Union, and Russia was in really bad shape after the Soviet Union collapsed. Their military was in disarray. Their economy was absolutely awful, and they were on the verge of collapse themselves. So they had to rebuild themselves. And there was a lot of, from the perspective of especially older Russians and Vladimir Putin and those who are in charge now, there was a lot of humiliation that came along with that time frame. And so since then, they've been trying to reassert themselves and bring their nation back up to power.
So I guess when we hear the term Russian sympathizers or whatever in these small groups in these other countries, I sit there and sometimes think, well, how are these people there? They're basically held over from when it was the Soviet Union.
Yep, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Absolutely, and that's why Russia looks at a lot of these places as traditional Russian lands. There's Russian people there, there's culture, there's ancestry, there's all these different things. And now they're a part of this other country, and Russia has a hard time accepting that.
Gotcha.
And so they want to keep their sphere of influence tight, and they don't want to lose their ideology to liberal Western values. And so that's part of the problem. So one of the things that happened back in 2014, besides Russia, annexing Crimea and then, creating the problems out in eastern Ukraine, was, if you remember, there was massive, large protests going on in Ukraine, in Kyiv specifically, because there was a government that was very pro-Russian at the time, but they had started looking west, and they had started doing things that were, I think, in my mind, that were more reflective of what the people of Ukraine wanted, right? They wanted a better relationship with the West. They wanted to be more European. They wanted more democracy. They wanted more freedom. They wanted more all of the things that are valued in the Western world. And as soon as Russia realized what was going on, they inserted their influence over that government, and the government had started signing some treaties, and government had started doing some things with the West. As soon as Russia got involved, I believe his name was I can't remember his name now. The former leader of Russia, or I'm sorry, of Ukraine. He said he basically abandoned all of the plans and all of the things, all of the agreements that he had with the West, and pivoted back towards Russia. And that is what created all of the chaos in Ukraine with the protests and the revolution that happened there. And then when it looked like the people were going to take over and overthrow the Ukrainian government because they weren't doing their will, that's when Russia went into the east. And that's when Russia started popping up in Crimea, the little green men that started popping up in Crimea everywhere, to basically take control back.
And all that was about mid 2000s or 2010?
No, that was so Ukraine is, they traditionally, those are some amazing people out there, because they've had a lot of revolutions over the course of the last 21 years or so. So back in the early 2000s, there was a thing called the Color Revolution. And then in 2014, before the annexation of Crimea and the Donbas area, they had already started. If you remember all the imagery that was coming out of Kyiv, where there was blown out buildings and people were camping right in the center of the city for months and months at a time.
Yeah,
that was because they were severely unhappy that the government had decided to abandon all of their look west and go back to Russia. And that did not sit well with them. And their goal was to overthrow that government. And essentially they did. But the second and third order effect of that was Russia was not going to allow, an unstable Ukraine to thrive. And they were not going to allow Ukraine to be democratic. And they were not going to allow Ukraine to, insert a leadership that was pro-Western.
Well, let me ask you this, and I don't know that you'll know the answer, but when was the Soviet Union first developed?
Oof.
Because
I have to go back and look at my history.
Wasn't it like was it mid to late 1800s when you had the Tsar and then you had Lenin?
Yep, and you had the Bolsheviks, and Russia has an amazing history and a really, really fascinating one. I cannot remember the year the Soviet Union was formed, but the Soviet Union, if I remember correctly, was definitely in existence over World War II, because the Russians took I don't even know the number offhand, but the losses that they took in World War II were, if we look back at our history in World War II, our losses were dwarfed by what the Russians took. I mean, the Russians were in the millions, Gabe.
Really?
In the millions, and they are a strong, proud people. And, ever since then, they've always understood that, keep in mind, Nazi Germany, easy to invade Russia east because there's no natural barriers, none at all. So literally, it's like a highway that they could drive and attack eastward, because there's no mountains, there's limited rivers until you get to a certain mountain range in Russia that is east of Moscow. So essentially, it's a 5-lane highway for invaders to come from the west to the east, and Ukraine is part through that. So, Russia's mindset is to create these these barriers to ensure that invaders don't come from the west to the east.
I got you.
But I don't remember when the Soviet Union was actually formed, so I apologize for that.
No problem. I was just thinking about it as you're talking. I'm kind of thinking through things, and I was just curious as if it was something that I guess Putin and Russia maybe saw it as ancestral land, but if it wasn't, it's something that was more recent, maybe in the last 100 years or something, that they had acquired all those small, I guess, states or countries or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And I wish I was a Soviet Union, Russia expert, but unfortunately I am not. So my knowledge of them is mostly modern times, and since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So actually, Gabe, that's the beauty of modern technology, bud. So as you're asking me these questions, I just did a quick little Google search.
I can't multitask, man. I can't multitask.
Yeah, see, dude. So the Soviet Union was actually formed on December 30th of 1922.
Oh wow!
And then the collapse was in 1991.
That's so interesting. It's interesting, even to the point that it's kind of like, we kind of assumed that the Crimea was always part of Russia, or in some of those other places, Latvia and other places, and it was actually pretty recent, and recent that they lost it, I guess. Another way to put that.
If you think in terms of how past empires, how long they've lasted, Roman Empire and Ottoman Empire, it's our time frame. Everything is condensed now, right?
Yeah.
So, even if you want to consider America as an empire, which a lot of countries like to call us one, it's such a small footprint in time compared to a lot of the other massive empires.
China, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
China's always playing the long game. So everything with China, America, it seems to be it's every 2 to 4 years, right? So.
Yeah.
But with China, it's like 50 to 100 years where their strategic thinking is.
That's interesting. So what else is in, let me ask you, what else is in Ukraine as far as it just being a buffer zone? But, I guess I'd assume there's other things that make it appealing to Russia as far as maybe.
So, they call Ukraine the breadbasket of Europe. So it's very fertile land. There's a lot of water that's running through there. It's fairly flat for the most part. I've had the pleasure of actually traveling to Ukraine and Kyiv for their Independence Day back in 2017. Really great people. Very proud.
They gained independence in 91 as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I believe so. Don't hold me to that completely, but I believe it was.
Well, even if it's around that area,
after the Soviet Union.
Even if it's around that area, it's funny because when we kind of think about our independence here, their independence, the majority of the population was around for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's crazy to think about that. And when you see on the news, the population coming together and taking up arms, it kind of puts that in perspective. There a lot of those people, and especially the older ones, they were around to see that day happen.
100%, Gabe. And you know what? I saw a story, I believe it was being reported probably yesterday, where an 80-year-old Ukrainian man came to like an enlistment site for the Ukrainian army and said that he was ready to fight for his country. And you talk about inspiring, and I've also been inspired to see the leader of Ukraine. He's 44 years old, and this guy's leading from the front. So there's a lot of unbelievably great stories out there about people who are very prideful that that they don't want Russia's version of governance. They prefer a more democratic, liberal way of living. And this 80-year-old man said, they asked him, why would you want to come fight? You're 80 years old. And he said, well, I want to do it for my grandkids.
Yeah.
So it's a generational responsibility. And, you've heard all the stories. You heard about probably the guys that were out at Snake Island.
Yeah.
And, who basically told the Russians to go F themselves, who told them to surrender or die. And they said, well, I guess we're going to choose death, right? So,
you know what's crazy is, and I might sound like an idiot for saying this, but I'm from Texas. I grew up in Texas, and we grew up with all the stories and and all the legendary people that have lived in the state, and from the Alamo to Gonzales to Goliad and all kinds of other battles that happen, and people basically fighting for the land that they live on, and we fall in love with those stories as kids growing up and hearing them in school, and different. Goliad's got this massive come and take it day, because that's where the flag originated from, and it's funny because we're very proud of those events and those stories, and here we are watching it in real time, all those things that we grew up hearing and seeing, and falling in love with the stories of what happened back then. And here are a group of people in the country doing that same stuff now,
Gabe, let me tell you, that's a really good analogy. There's a lot of similarities between Texans, especially Texans, from generations past, and modern day Kiev, however you want to pronounce their capital city. I mean, literally, that city right now is the Alamo, bud.
Yeah,
it is. It is, and they're going to fight. And I think the Russians are already surprised at the amount of resistance that they're getting. But it's really inspiring to see, such a love of country and a love of people and a love of democratic values that dying is a better alternative than what they see for their future, under Russian control. So it's pretty neat thing to see. And you're right, there's a lot of parallels between Texas and modern day Ukraine.
I've watched a bunch of stuff online and even social media posts a bunch of stuff, and there's so many times, especially here in the States, where everything's so readily accessible, and we've kind of dumbed ourselves down to things that when you see a group of people that are living in the moment that is very simplistic and pure, in the sense that I either fight for my life or I die. Either way, there's a good chance I may not make it, and it's got nothing to do with social media or your phone or what you're learning in school or who's marching at what, because they don't like this, that, or the other. A lot of the stuff that we run into in the United States, it kind of seems at times superficial. I mean, sometimes it feels like it's a very deep problem that needs to be addressed, and other times when you look at somebody that's fighting for their life and the future of their country for their children, and it's immediate, it really puts a lot of that other stuff into perspective, and all of a sudden it's less important than what we probably think it is when you look at it as simple as what these people are going through right now. Or it's simplistic in itself, and it's immediate. Either I pick up a gun and I fight for my family, or the life that we know is over. Yeah,
you hit the nail on the head, bud. And I think the key word to that is perspective. Right. So all the stuff that I think at times, we're all guilty of, as far as, trivial things that maybe are happening with our lives or our country, or, some of the arguments that we may have as fellow countrymen, depending on what perspective you have, pales in comparison to actually fighting for your survival.
Sure.
And that's what Ukraine's doing right now. And like I said, it's pretty inspiring. I'd love to see them be triumphant, but as a realist, they're definitely facing an uphill battle in doing so. And, I just, definitely my heart and my mind is with them. I had a chance, like I said, to travel there and to meet a lot of those people. And man, let me tell you, dude, they just kept putting vodka upon vodka in front of my face, and I cannot drink with the Ukrainians. Yeah, that's for sure.
Very welcoming, it sounds like.
Yeah, they're champs, and they're good people. They're good people, and they care about their families, and they care about their freedom, and they're willing to take up arms, and whether you're young or whether you're old, this is what's important to them.
Sure.
They don't want to be forced or told what to do or how to live or who they can be allies with or who they can't be. And, you know, you have to respect that. And it's admirable and it's inspiring.
I don't want to go into something that you can't talk about, so feel free to tell me next comment. But
It's all good, man.
What is in a broad term, what is something that'll help bring this to some sort of resolution? Because I can't imagine that the Ukrainians are going to have to beat Russia back to the border, and that's going to be the end. And there has to be other things at play, whether it's other countries getting involved or sanctions, or maybe it's a combination of things. But what do you, if you can speak on it, what are some of the things that you think would have to happen for this whole thing to come to an end?
So I think first of all, there needs to be unity across all perspectives as far as the world goes. You probably saw, there was a UN resolution that, condemned, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I believe every country on the Security Council had voted, for condemning Russia. China did not, predictably so. Russia vetoed it, and they're a permanent member of the Security Council, and they rightfully vetoed it, as of course they would. China did not veto it. China abstained, as well as India, and I believe one other country also abstained. So even though we knew the resolution wouldn't be passed, it was a pretty strong message globally that this is an unacceptable action by Russia. Now,
so there has to be 100% consensus to make it pass?
Yeah, to actually pass a UN resolution, there has to be unanimous. Yep.
Gotcha.
But, from my perspective as just an average citizen and not in any kind of professional capacity, they need help. They need help, dude. So where that help comes from, I don't know. There's people that are way smarter than me that get paid a lot more than I do to make those kinds of decisions. But one of the things that I know about Russia is predominantly they are a one-trick pony, meaning their economy is almost solely dependent, probably about 90% dependent on oil and natural gas.
Yeah.
So nations across the world are going to have to find an alternative way to produce energy while simultaneously cutting off Russia from exporting their number one export.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know a place they can get a whole bunch of oil.
Dude, we both do. We both do, right? But those are political decisions, right?
But even at that, that's something that doesn't happen overnight, does it? That's something that takes years. So potentially,
not necessarily, because if you have the infrastructure ready to go, then it's definitely not years. Okay. I would actually guess, without being a oil and natural gas expert, I would think that capability-wise, I don't know about other countries, but the United States was pretty close to energy independence.
Yeah.
And I think we have the mechanisms to do so. But at the same time, Europe has their own challenges because Russia supplies almost it's an astronomical amount, Gabe, as far as the oil and natural gas that Russia provides to Europe to be able to heat their homes and provide energy. So Europe has to make strong decisions. They have to be willing to withstand. They already gave. If we're upset about paying $4 a gallon, there's a reason why they drive small cars over there. It's because it's so much more expensive over there. So I don't know what it is right now, but I'm guessing it's somewhere around $8 a gallon, probably in excess of that. So these are really hard decisions by these European nations. So if you really want sanctions to sting, you've got to do it through what is going to hurt Russia the most.
Yeah. And in terms going to make their population suffer as well.
Yep. Absolutely.
getting that turned over.
Absolutely. So if you cut off their means to wage war, and of course there's other means militarily too. There's cyber, there's
Sure.
all kinds of different mechanisms, but if you cut off the money, they're going to have a hard time. And for Russia, they've always said, and they've said this publicly, if oil stays around $100 a barrel, they're in really, really good shape.
Yeah.
If it goes below 50, they're struggling.
Yeah.
They're struggling. And if we could drive down the oil prices, so that's going to take not only the will of Europe to say, okay, we can find different ways to be able to get our energy needs, and maybe oil producing countries, get them to ratchet up more production. I know this is unpopular because obviously the modern Western world wants to go away from fossil fuels and go to more cleaner energy, and that's completely understood. But really, if you're going to stop Putin, and you're going to stop Russia, it has to be through economically. And the only way to hit him in the wallet hard is to hit him through sanctions that hit the oil and natural gas industry, period.
Yeah. I saw Germany said the other day that I guess they were temporarily suspending that pipeline from Russia. But, even at that, that's something that hasn't, I don't think it's been completely constructed yet, so that wasn't a financial resource that Russia had been utilizing, but it also
Right.
wasn't a source of oil that Germany was utilizing. So,
Right.
to be able to kind of cut that off is maybe a little easier than it can be for other countries.
So I think that they were pretty close. That's the Nord Stream 2. So the Nord Stream 2 essentially goes through the Baltic Sea underground, underwater, and it bypasses really Ukraine because, the problem obviously, with hostilities in Ukraine is that there's no way they were going to let, Russia run a pipeline through their country to make sure that oil and gas get to Europe from there. So I believe they were either pretty close to, to commissioning it and getting that up and running, or maybe they were in the beginning stages of actually doing that. But yeah, that's definitely something that they had hit. But they have other means to get those things to Europe.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, and I don't know that you saw it or anything, or if you're aware of it, but I thought I saw something in the news this past week that Russia was heading towards the nuclear plant in Chernobyl.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of that?
So that's a really good question. I've actually been pondering that myself as far as what is, what's the goal of them there. And really the only thing that I've seen, I don't know enough. I don't know why they would want a decommissioned,
outdated
nuclear power plant that is still technically active but leaking, and they have like a concrete dome that's keeping radiation from escaping from there. Other than the fact that just about all, I think all, and I'm not a nuclear expert, so I'll put that disclaimer out. Sure. I think all nuclear power plants require water power to be able to actually function. So Chernobyl sits on a river, and the river actually runs all the way downstream to Kyiv. So it's a straight shot from Chernobyl. I think it's less than like 70 miles from Chernobyl to the capital city. So by them taking that area there, they got a straight shot to be able to move forces from Belarus down through Chernobyl and then ultimately into Kyiv.
Oh, so it's less to do with the uranium facility or the nuclear facility than what it is just being geographically strategic.
I think so, but I don't, strategically speaking, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's other reasons for that I just don't know that, the Russian government has identified as a strategic location that they need to be able to take and hold. And then there was another strategic location just, I think, 30 to 40 miles north of Kyiv. There was an airfield there that they've been fighting over. I don't know if Russia has taken over it, but they've been fighting over there since day one, and the Ukrainians have been holding them off. And it's very strategic because then Russia could fly forces into that airfield, and they're so much closer to the fight. For the capital.
what kind of what kind of military does Ukraine have? Is it pretty advanced, or is it advanced and small, or is it kind of maybe not as on par with what Russia has as far as equipment goes? Or
they're definitely not on par. And Gabe, you can Google, for your listeners maybe later, but they show kind of like a comparison, and it's the Ukraine is dwarfed by Russia, of course, as far as firepower, as far as combat aircraft capability, ISR, in every category. However, with that said, 2014 they were so ill prepared, and they had no capability whatsoever. But a lot of allies and partners from a NATO perspective, including the United States, have been working. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I was there. Have been working with their government to help bolster their capabilities. And I definitely think they're better prepared today than they were in 2014. Much better prepared. How better prepared? I don't know, actually. But at the end of the day, they're still way better prepared and way better armed than they were in 2014 to be able to resist.
In talking to you about this kind of stuff, it's interesting because I kind of get this mental picture that these people are similar to kind of, I don't know, maybe like the Israelis, where they, with the the area that they live in and the types of things that happen to them from time to time, or in some cases, daily, they don't let themselves get very soft, as far as the people go.
They're tough people.
Yeah,
they're very, very tough people. So you're spot on with that. There's maybe some parallels with Israel, but I mean, Israel's living in a neighborhood where just about every one of their neighbors is hostile towards them. Where Ukraine to the west, so you've got Belarus straight to the north, which is hostile towards them and is basically a Russian satellite state.
Okay.
Then you've got Poland to the west.
People have been running into Poland, I think, right?
To the northwest. Yep, to the northwest. And you've got Romania to the south, which is also friendly towards Ukraine and a part of the NATO alliance. And then you've got Moldova to the direct southwest. And then, Crimea to the direct south, and then Russia, out there to the east. So
is Moldova friendly to Ukraine, or are they more aligned with Russia?
I don't know them so much. I mean, I do think they've got a little bit of, Russia's got their thumb on them a little bit, but, I haven't heard a whole lot about them, being hostile to Ukraine or hugely pro-Russia. There's that small little sliver that I told you about of a frozen conflict that's out there in Moldova that Russia is in. But other than that, I don't really know a whole lot about Moldova's relationship with both. I would probably say they'd probably side a little bit more with Russia than Ukraine.
And who are? Hang on, let me clear my throat. I have this massive loogie. Apologize. Who are the Chechens?
So the Chechens, oh man, you're getting into a whole different concept.
I'm sorry, man. I've been trying to keep up with things this week, and I had read something about some Chechens were coming in to help Russia, and I was like, well, are they a religious group, or are they? Is that a country, or what is that?
Chechnya is a region, a contested region. Oh God, I wish I had a map so I could actually see. But the Russians have fought an insurgency in the Chechnyan region up until, I'm totally guessing here, around probably 2012, somewhere around there. So there was a lot of rebel groups.
Who are the insurgents?
Yeah, there's a high Muslim population.
Gotcha.
That's out in Chechnya. So Russia had all kinds of problems with Chechnya in the early 2000s, in the beginning of the Putin era. And since then, I believe that there is a rebel, or I don't know what the right term is, overlord leader that is completely aligned with, President Putin, that he does a lot of, nasty work for President Putin, regionally.
Gotcha.
Keep in mind, a lot of people may not know Russia's involved in a lot of stuff around the globe. So they've had a lot of adventurism over the course of the last 10 years, from Syria to they've been whooping up crap down in Libya for a long time, and mostly not through the regular Russian military, but mostly through a paramilitary group called Wagner. Now, Wagner is kind of like, if you remember, America used to have, it's wrong for me to draw, parallels, but I think for people to understand exactly what the Wagner group is, if you remember, pre-Afghanistan, we used to have a military contracted group called Blackwater. You remember Blackwater?
Yeah. They're kind of like private groups that the military would hire, right?
They're essentially private mercenaries, right?
Gotcha.
So Russia's been doing a lot of stuff around the globe through Wagner, and Wagner's their paramilitary group, and so this way it keeps them. It's plausible deniability, right, Gabe? So
gotcha.
They're like, no, there's no Russian forces there, yet there's Russians there, creating all kinds of chaos in these different countries. So Syria was one of them. Syria was the first one. And then, Libya was the most recent one. So it's not like, Russia hasn't been involved in geopolitical conflicts up until now. They've been fomenting a lot of stuff across.
And I guess that's something, I mean, without, you'd probably know better than I would, but I guess maybe that is, I don't see when you say that, I think like, what is the purpose of doing that in those countries? And maybe it's just to destabilize
Create
things.
division.
Yeah.
Create division.
Yeah.
That's ultimately their goal. So another example of creating division. So you're probably aware that Turkey's a NATO ally, right? Mm-hmm. Turkey's a NATO ally, but one of the things that Russia tried to create divisions with is Russia has a very advanced surface-to-air missile system that they produce, that they sold to Turkey, and we as a nation were adamant that Turkey, you can't buy this weapon system because it's not compatible to our modern fifth-gen aircraft, which is like the F-35 or the F-22.
So in another sense, it would work on that aircraft.
That system was designed to shoot down those aircraft.
Gotcha.
So that's why we're like, Turkey, you can't buy this. And Turkey's like, well, you can't. We're part of NATO, but we're our own country, and we feel that we need this. So trying to drive that wedge is what Russia does. Right?
I got you. I'm following.
They're good at driving wedges. So Libya, another example. Whatever the government is that's in charge, and whatever side that we're taking, Russia's going to take the opposite side.
Gotcha.
To create those divisions. So, and I remember, I don't know if this is still in existence, Gabe, so I'm certainly not a credible person to speak on this, but I do remember that there are, I know that they're in existence. To give you another example, groups in Texas, talk about Texas, that are pro-secession from the United States, right? I know you probably
Are
know
you
about
sure about that?
Yeah. So
wink, wink.
I remember hearing, and I don't know the truth to this, I remember hearing about this probably a good 10, 15 years ago, that Russia was a big donor to a lot of these groups.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what they do.
Yeah.
That's what they do. Because if you weaken alliances, you create more power for yourself.
Sure.
And that's the Russian model. That's the Russian model. If you it's divide and conquer to the most basic level. Yeah. The more alliance. That's why Russia has such a hard time with NATO. It's 30 nations. That's a big alliance, and that's a lot of unity.
So it keeps them busy, so to speak. So let me ask you this, Gabe. everybody likes to have a defined line, and maybe there isn't one. But shirts and skins, who is Russia's allies that we're aware of? Because we kind of have a good idea of who ours are, right? But who is more aligned with Russia?
So just about all of their Soviet, satellite countries.
And then China and like Iran too, right?
Well, so it's really complicated. It's one of those things. How remember Facebook used to have, I'm in a relationship and it's complicated. Remember that?
Oh yeah, Nina was on that for a long time.
So it's complicated when it comes to Russia too. So I think the alliance between Russia and China is very, very complicated. Two very ancient civilizations. China plays the long game for everything. I think the alliance or the friendship or whatever you want to call it between Russia and China is, that old saying that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You got it. You got it. I had a hard time spitting it out, but yes, that I think is it's a convenience and it's energy dependence too, right? Because China, for the most part, they don't care about a clean environment. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about any of that stuff. They care about China.
Yeah, and
you can make your own judgments on whether that's the right or the wrong way of thinking, but they care about China, and they're willing to be friends with anybody that will have a relationship with China, and Russia has that relationship, and they do depend on them for a lot of oil and natural gas as well. So, I mean, that's really it. North Korea is always a wild card because no one knows what North Korea is going to do. They're the most isolated nation on the face of the earth. So, but North Korea doesn't like us, and so we're problematic for them. So I think we can call them. And then there's Iran. Iran is interesting simply because of that we haven't heard a whole lot from Iran lately. They've been relatively quiet for the most part. There's always that unsettling tension between them and Israel that, one could hit the other at any given time because of their long historic disputes of many different things. But certainly there's friendly relations between Iran and Russia. Ironically, what's really ironic? And I learned this firsthand from my work over in Europe is I've traveled to Israel a lot. And Israel is a fantastic ally. They have great capability. They have amazingly professional military. They're amazing. They really are. They're great people who are fighting for their survival just like anybody else. But they actually have a very friendly relationship with Russia.
Oh, really?
And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that. So, and a lot of times nations create alliances or at least friendships with other nations because it benefits them and their survival and their strategic objectives as a nation. And so I think that's one where, that's one relationship where, Russia's never done anything to Israel. Israel's never done anything to Russia. They're both very professional, militaries. And so, they've found a way to work together.
I'm an idiot on a lot of this stuff. So, but I always and I don't know where I got this from, but I always figured or always thought that Russia sometimes supplied weapons to like Iran and other places like that.
So, what's funny is that the next, I believe, and I don't have this 100% factual, but I believe one of the biggest exporters next to oil and gas from Russia is weapons.
Yeah.
So, they make a lot of weapons for sure. And they export a lot of them. to a lot of different countries. They have a lot of security agreements and weapons sales agreements, and a lot of times it's easier to acquire weapons through Russia than it is the United States. We have a lot of processes and foreign military sales laws and rules that we have to go through, and sometimes it takes a lot of time to actually sell weapons to other countries, because we have to make sure we're doing it right.
Yeah.
And, Russia is just like, you want it? You got the cash? We'll send it tomorrow. So a little bit different, which, some countries prefer to turn to Russia when it comes to weapons sales because it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's just easier and it's quicker. So, yes. So to your point, they do export a lot of weapons, and there's a lot of Russian weapons all across the globe.
Oh, I thought I was gonna have some clarity and weight off my shoulders talking to you, but in having this conversation, I'm realizing more and more that we live in a very complicated world, my friend.
You are right, brother. You are absolutely right, and there's plenty. I get plenty of nights where I'm kind of tossing and turning, thinking about stuff, just because it's hard to have an impact on the outcome, especially for those who want to do the right thing and want the right outcome. Sometimes you can feel a little bit helpless, but at the end of the day, you just got to keep churning and working towards the right thing. And I'm a firm believer that things do happen for a reason, and outcomes, if you work hard enough for them, they'll be positive in the way. Evil doesn't survive, So, and I'm not necessarily calling anybody evil, because honestly, I do believe that there is a lot of countries out there that do things because they believe it's in their best interest, right? Yeah. And other ones may do things out of pure, power hungry or whatever. And I can't get into the mindset of President Putin and why he's doing things. But at the end of the day, I think it's pretty obvious that he's doing the wrong thing when it comes to Ukraine. And his information operations campaign, to his own people and to the West is just falling on deaf ears, because I think we all know really what's going on. And he can only lie so much. I mean, because you've seen him say, you saw him say weeks up before the invasion, saying, other countries don't have anything to worry about what Russia does within our borders. We're invading no one. This is Western hysteria. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We all knew. We knew what they were doing. And, I think as a nation, we did a really good job to kind of, in the days leading up to it, we're like, it's happening. And it gave the opportunity, I think, for Ukraine to really prepare and bunker down and execute probably a defensive plan. So, we'll see what happens. I don't think it's a done deal that Russia achieves all of their objectives. I hope and I pray that, that there's some negotiation and some, diplomacy that comes of here. I mean, that ends up coming to fruition. I hope and pray that that's what happens, but I think we'll have to see. I think, there's definitely more that can be done. But we're going to have to see. There's going to take a lot of will, not just of the Ukrainians, but it's going to take a will of the international community to make this come to a peaceful conclusion where Ukraine stays completely intact.
Yeah. And I'm hoping the little comment that he made towards Finland and I think it was Norway, whether it's an empty threat about them.
Norway and Sweden.
Whether it's an empty threat or not, I hope that's something that perks up people's ears who maybe didn't have their ears perked up till those comments, about them advising them not to join NATO. That just kind of gives them a something more to say, hey, he's been lying, he's continuing to lie, and maybe he's got bigger aspirations, and it needs to be stopped now.
The Nordic nations, so, I've talked with a lot of folks, and, I've got a friend that I keep in contact with that is a part of the Danish army up there in Denmark, and they all know. They're watching. They know what the threat is. Norway is a NATO nation. Denmark is a NATO nation. Finland and Sweden are not. They've remained neutral. But they're all capable nations, very, very capable nations. So they know what's going on. They're watching. I don't think they're naive to what the threat possibly could be. And at the end of the day, even though they're not NATO nations, I guarantee you, if Russia was to try something with Finland or Sweden, that there would be a response, and there would probably be a military response from other nations, even though they're not NATO nations. Ukraine was a lot more complicated because Ukraine, typically was a part of Russia and the Soviet Union. Sweden and Finland are a different story.
Gotcha. Well, shoot, man, we did about an hour, and I appreciate your knowledge and all your insight into things. You've got a little bit more of a I guess you're in that arena a little bit more than the rest of us, And like I said, I was pretty ignorant to the whole region and how complicated it is. So talking to you about it has been very beneficial to me, and I'm hoping to other people listening to this podcast.
Hey, thanks, Gabe. No, I really appreciate you having me on. What's funny is that I've been back in the continental United States and specifically in the D.C. area since July, and I feel like I'm completely out of the loop right now.
Really?
So I've talked to my successor over there, and try to get his thoughts on what's going on, but honestly, it's evolving, and what they're seeing and what they're doing is a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day thing. Yeah. So, I'm certainly not in the know like they are when you're over there and you're getting intel briefs and you're getting all kinds of situational awareness briefs of what's going on. And those guys are doing a lot of unbelievable work over there. All of U.S. forces that are integrated, with our NATO allies are doing absolutely awesome work. So, even though we're not actively involved in the conflict, there's still some great work being done in support of Ukraine and in support of our allies to make sure that there's collective defense that's happening, to make sure it doesn't spill over to one of the NATO nations, because no one wants that to happen for sure. So a lot of great work being done by our forces over there and by our allies and partners. So thanks for having me on, man. It's been a pleasure and always fun to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody for listening to this podcast. Thank you. Thanks, Gabe.
Thanks, Gabe. You too.
Later, bud.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.